Welcome, everyone, to the Leading Together podcast, Insights for Delaware's Tomorrow. In each episode, we sit down with Delaware's top minds and leaders to share perspectives that help advance FSE's mission, which is to build capacity, raise awareness, and really elevate school board leadership across all of our communities. And today, I'm honored to introduce to you Melissa Zebley. She was a trailblazing leader with a remarkable 32-year career in the Delaware State Police, which she was a colonel, and has left an indelible mark on public service and law enforcement. As her state trooper career began in 1992, and she made history in 2020 as being the first woman to serve as superintendent of the Delaware State Police. Now, her tenure's been marked by groundbreaking initiatives, and I'm so happy that she's here today and that the audience will have a chance to hear about her experiences. But she created a wellness unit. She supported officer well-being. She created a highway safety unit to enhance safety across Delaware. She graduated, which is pretty impressive. She graduated from the FBI National Academy and Northwestern University School of Police Staff and Command. So her leadership includes modernizing the agency, championing officer wellness, as I mentioned, and strengthening connections with the community, all of which I firmly believe are relevant and parallel to the work that Delaware school boards do across our state. So we're thrilled to have her to join us today to share her insights and her experiences and the lessons that she's learned. Melissa, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's an honor and privilege to be here and speak to your community, educating the first state. So thank you.
Sure. Well, what a career. I mean, I gave highlights, right? But there's much more to it. 32 years with the Delaware State Police. And you really I've always had a forward-thinking approach. So could we start maybe with just what's your approach to leadership and kind of, what was it like to be in that role and to build what you built?
Well, certainly thank you for that very kind introduction. And, what I love about the position I held and the career I had was our commitment to public safety. And you on board with that mentality in mind, that proverbial to protect and serve philosophy that we all hold near and dear to our hearts. And, we hire folks with that mentality in mind and that strength of character, having formulated them to that point in their life. And then we, train you to the competencies of the role that we play as state troopers. But to your point, I think always leading with that character-centered, character-driven, value-driven philosophy that essentially is why you get hired, but just letting that lead me through each phase of my career, through each position of my career, so that, I always would say to folks, even teaching an ethics class, it's not about the words on the page or the definition of integrity. It's how do people know it when they see it? How do they know that you possess those character attributes that are near and dear to what we do? Because we find folks at their most vulnerable. That's why they call us. And if you're always putting the demonstration of that character on the front foot, and let that always be the first foot that you take, and you're competent and invest in your competency as as maybe your rank rises. And that has never failed me throughout any position I've held.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And for school boards, I hear the parallel in that there's like an ethical responsibility for the decision making and how you show up, and who's that character that shows up and this sort of to in acting in the interest of the public good.
Right. And people will do what they see far more than what they're told. So if they see you embodying all that you expect of others and holding yourself accountable to that same standard, they will follow you. And they'll first of all believe in mission, and they will follow your style of leadership because they see it and they see the investment you're making in it.
Yeah. So we've talked previously, and one thing that came up is this notion about leadership being a relay race and not a sprint. And I think for many leaders, and probably district leaders and board leaders, sometimes it feels like a series of races or a series of marathons, right? But
Right.
Can we unpack that? Why do you think leadership should be a relay race?
Because, for us as an agency, it will take my agency, and absolutely parallels to what educators are doing. We're 101 years old, starting 102. And the agency is bigger than any one person or any one period of time. So
Mhm.
certainly there is a necessity to always be considering who's going to sit in that seat, be it the left front seat of a cruiser
Mhm.
or office seat that you may sit in at that given time.
Mhm.
So I will say that, in the policing profession, we do very well at training towards a task, training to do things like de-escalate, handle a critical incident, respond to a call for service. But we've done a great job of investing, understanding the necessity to develop leaders at every level. The notion of disparate leadership, that a trooper at a scene believes they're a leader in that scene and they need to, handle that with care and give the best to that person who's calling for service, all the way up to the sergeant who's leading that group,
Mhm.
the captain, and certainly the colonel. So we step outside of, not just training to the equipment around our waist, but training to the competencies that we need to possess above our neck, right?
Yep.
The ability to communicate, the ability to think, the ability to understand human behavior and dynamics. So I've had the absolute pleasure of, take out all the things you imagine police train about, and we just train about leadership and
Mm.
understanding those that work with you, and interpreting, any ups and downs they may be experiencing in their career, to interpreting that person you're trying to assist in the community. And
Mhm.
and it's just, an evolution of your leadership competency that we're trying to invest, be it from the newest person to certainly every rank of leadership. And then it's incumbent on me, as it was at the time, to be making a similar investment in my competency and demonstrate to folks that you never, can never rest on your laurels, so to speak. You always have to be evolving so that you can lead the agency forward, and
Mhm.
not just forward in the right step right in front of you, but years down the line, so that the next generation is better for it, that they can pick up that baton and move the relay forward.
Mhm. No, I think it's a great way of thinking about what leadership is, and your point about the institution outlasts the individual, right?
Right.
Yet some of the decisions that individuals make can have a lasting effect on the institution, and we want that to be for good.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
And certainly, in our industry and anyone's industry, when decisions fall short of expectations, it's the responsibility of certainly myself, to take accountability for that, and then, build layers of insulation to prepare the next generation not to make a same mistake,
Yeah.
right? And that really is, why we invest so heavily in wellness, resilience, and leadership training,
Mhm.
so that you feel comfortable inserting yourself if someone's about to make a mistake, right?
Right.
And you can prevent that next situation from unfolding, perhaps because you have the capacity and bandwidth to assert yourself and on behalf of someone else and pull them out of maybe a bad decision or a bad
Mhm.
period of time. And yeah, that has to certainly start with me, that mentality, and filter all the way through the ranks. And
Mhm.
we worked very hard on that, so that you're right, those legacy projects or
Mhm.
ideas supersede people
Yeah,
and
exactly.
they continue. Right.
Yep. The other thing you mentioned, I just want to touch on before we go to the next segment, is about the investing in your competencies. And so, education and training, development, professional development, mentorship, all these things really play a big part in how we develop as professionals and how we develop as leaders. So, how have you approached your own investment in your competencies, learning things that are new, or finding supports through others that could be mentors and help guide you?
All of those things, right, are great touch points that I had the benefit of throughout my career, certainly to include mentorship.
Mm.
And what I love about mentors is, you can imagine, some mostly men, some women of a higher rank as I came through the ranks, until a certain point. But at the same time, mentors that, again, are character driven, but will push you outside your comfort zone.
Mhm.
And what I have always found led me to my next opportunity was someone who had been my focal leader at a given time, who valued my work ethic and my character, and pulled me into a position that I thought, I would never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined that my career would have taken me to these places.
Mhm.
But it's somebody's confidence in you, and it's someone, challenging you a bit to do more, to give
Yep.
more, to be more. So, when you look for mentors, they shouldn't just be folks that keep you in your comfort zone.
Yep.
You can rely on, that hold your trust, but at the same time push you and challenge you. And then similarly, look for those educational opportunities that are available to you within your agency, but invest in yourself. Mid-career, I decided to go back and get my master's degree,
Mhm.
and did it while on shift work. So found a program that suited going on nights and weekends. So every other weekend for a year, going on nights, because at some point you realize I have to be also willing to to diversify my thought, my experiences,
Mhm.
and enhance my education outside of the job so that I'm better on the
Yep.
job.
Yep.
So I think
That's
all of those things in combination suited me well, and I think would suit folks well in your industry as well.
yeah, yeah. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think, everything that you accomplished and all of the recognition you had, have had is entirely well deserved. You are a remarkable example of leadership and really self-service and dedication to a mission. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do want to let the audience know that you're a Hall of Fame inductee, and kind of what does that mean? Like, how kind of seeing all the investment you made in yourself, and then being recognized that way.
It was amazingly humbling. I had one of my colleagues nominated me, Lieutenant Colonel Meadows. So again, just a beautiful tribute written. I had no idea until I was called by the nominating committee and told that I was going to be a 2024 recipient. But to hear or see his written words and
Mm,
the nominators who accompanied his submission, tremendously humbling. And I hope it speaks to a career that is possible, right? So
yeah.
when you get up there and you get to be in that moment a spokesperson for women in the policing profession, in law enforcement leadership, or any rank or role, you can see it as achievable, and really a great opportunity for me to say thank you. Thank you to those mentors I mentioned. Thank you
Mhm.
to my parents, who are phenomenal people, and hopefully bring in not just those interested parties who may be considering law enforcement, some women who may
Mhm.
want to see that any and all things are achievable, but at the same time the community, to see the nature of the individual who's leading Delaware's largest agency at that time, to see
Mhm.
the nature of my personality and character, and that maybe that gives them a boost of confidence in what they can expect from the policing profession in Delaware.
Yep. Yeah, I well deserved. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And yeah, and it's a great transition to the second segment that I wanted to talk about what your experience has been being one of the few women in a leadership table, both locally and nationally.
Yeah, so when for 3 years, and almost to your earlier question about, getting outside your comfort zone, learning more, building competencies, I was purposeful about liaisoning with fellow colonels at the national level.
Mhm.
So we meet quite a bit, and in that last 3 years, I was the only woman at that table,
Mm.
which was very surprising to me in 21, 2, 3, and
Mhm.
4 until mid 2024, when another woman rose to the rank of colonel in Minnesota, which was wonderful to see. But it's a interesting place to find yourself, and again, I think pushing myself outside of my comfort zone locally allowed
Mhm.
me to do it nationally and sit at that table and lend my voice to the issues of concern, lend my voice and our development of best practices to the room, and develop a rapport with those folks where in the aftermath of sitting at that table, many of those colonels have said, we have women in law enforcement groups in our region, in our state. Would you come speak to them? And I have never said no. From Tennessee to Iowa to Kentucky to Maine to Newport, Rhode Island, I will never say no. And I think the visibility that I can bring at that rank, again, for their sake, says all things are achievable. They just go and ask the hard questions about how to get there, what level of demand and sacrifice it creates. But I think it allows you to find your own voice as a colonel and use my put my own take on the role, on the agency. I don't think an event ever passed where I didn't say the badge is over our heart for a reason, not afraid to use the word love. All of those things that maybe weren't a part of a colonel's conversation before, but I never shied away from that. But it was the evolution of all those other decisions that allowed me to find my voice nationally and locally.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I want to thank you for your service and thank the entire Delaware State Police. I mean, you're out there to do service for the community. You put your lives at risk, and it's a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice for the people in uniform and their families. I'm sure it's wrought with anxiety, and you want to make sure everyone is safe and well. And the conditions today in the world are at a on their best day unsettling. So we wanted to thank you for your service and also give a shout out
Thank
to
you.
the entire agency. Sure. So
They
we
deserve
talked a
it.
little
So
bit
thank
about
you.
being sure. And just a little bit more on this thing about being, being a woman. What strengths do you think, particularly in your field, do women bring to the roles that they play? I think the diversity on school boards is a topic we could talk about for a long time. But I'm just curious to hear, what unique strengths do women bring, and how might there be a parallel?
Certainly a parallel. And I would say in any industry, what I've witnessed and what I've experienced in my own house is, the level of communication and connectivity with, as I said, folks don't call 911 by accident. We're usually finding many folks from your earliest days in your career throughout the rest in whatever rank or role, you find folks often in crisis or on their worst day. And I have found that women often are very adept at those skills that I mentioned earlier above the neck, the ability to think, communicate, be empathetic, and, understand and interpret behaviors in a way that can put people at ease. And, in our agency, women have been quite successful. And I say that because undoubtedly, as similar to it is as it is in schools, not everything is associated with rank, right? So I achieved different ranks, but women are serving throughout the agency in so many diverse roles. From flying the helicopter to being in charge of the mounted patrol unit, to being the colonel at one period in time. So serving in all of those roles, I think that the ability to communicate, diagnose situations, problem solve, which is what we do as a business, and be empathetic with folks, and be someone that, as we mentioned about wellness and resiliency, someone that is approachable, that you can come and speak to and feel that you're going to get the best level of care and advice. And ultimately, I think, and this is a universal skill, but that necessity to be trustworthy in those moments too. So that's been my experience. And women are excelling in the policing profession, and you don't always see it associated with rank. So I encourage folks to look around the agency, look at the diverse roles that we can hold, and you will find women in every corner.
Yeah, that's great. That's great to know. It's also good for, the youth and young people who are looking for a career to know that those opportunities are out there. I think it parallels to a board, and you let me know if you think this comparison is okay. But board members they're serving in a public facing role, and they're the elected voice of the community. And in many instances, when the community reaches out to the board member, they're reaching out with a concern. They're
Right.
not just reaching out to be like, "Hey, how you doing?" Right? There's some challenge or something that they want to have happen or see changed, usually to benefit, children or a class of children. And so I think um, the ability to make someone feel seen and heard, and to be willing to kind of think through a situation with someone, they all seem to be skills that would be good for a board member, while the intensity of the situation is obviously a lot less than what an officer would need to confront.
Exactly, and I think yeah, and in composing a board or being a member of a board, it's sort of equal parts all the things we talked about. As a board member in other institutions and places myself, it's certainly learning the competencies associated with the
Mhm.
work, right? What you're being asked to do, having a greater clarity and understanding about those calls to action that are coming your
Mhm.
way. They need some consideration given to this issue or that, but a necessity to ensure that all voices are heard,
Mhm.
because everyone approaches things with a different lens, a different skill set, a different background, and I think um, the necessity there is certainly to ensure that all voices um, have prepared themselves and then
Mhm.
have the opportunity to be heard for the purpose of producing the best outcome. So it
Mhm.
does take, as a member of a board, it certainly takes what I would say in many positions in our field is a lot of sacrifice.
Mhm.
Folks think that the higher you climb, the more people serve you. No, the higher you climb, the more people you serve.
People you serve. Yeah.
As a board member, the more people you
Yeah.
serve, right?
Yep.
So to understand who's your audience, who are the recipients of the decision you've been asked to problem solve for,
Mhm.
is undoubtedly, I would imagine, complex and multifaceted. So that's where that sort of harmony of all those voices is essential to
Mhm.
orchestrate the best outcome.
Yep. I think that's a great point, and it transitions us into our third segment, which is really about connecting with the community, and the importance of fostering trust and developing those relationships so that people are approachable and they can have the impact that's desired. Now, for better or worse, you had the opportunity to walk into a public-facing, community-serving role, where in the middle of COVID, and there were a lot of gaps in trust, and you did a fantastic job really engaging the community and rebuilding that trust. And for board members, I think, everybody wants Delaware to move towards number one in national education, and so it's a similarly tenuous and contentious point in time. Could you talk us through what it was like for you to walk into that role and with COVID, and then need to engage with the community when you're not allowed to go to the community?
Well, it was a very unique time that I hope none of us live
Ever
through
see?
again.
Yeah.
With that being said, much like any leader on a board position or anywhere, the necessity to be intentional, right? Because
Mm.
and I said this to myself in that moment. What does the job need from me right now?
Mhm.
And in that moment, the job most specifically needed re-engagement in public trust, and certainly the ability to keep our folks healthy, because we're never going to move into a remote posture, right? We are
Right.
always going to be a forward-facing entity. So you had dueling needs to reinstitute or restabilize a community trust and the health and wellness of your folks. Um,
Mhm.
and so I knew those were if I could tackle those two issues simultaneously and
Mhm.
purposefully with intent, I could move us forward out of that in the best way possible. And to touch on the internal piece, a lot of that was also associated with civil unrest and a very challenging
Right.
time, superseded COVID. So, it'd been a minute since I rode in the left front seat, so I needed to get in the right front seat. And I literally rode with troopers around the state from Penny Hill to Bridgeville
Mm-hmm.
to hear their issues and concerns and what we could be doing as a staff to ensure their safety, ensure that their families knew we had their best interest at heart. And we really, that's again, to your point earlier, establish a wellness and resiliency program.
Mm-hmm.
It's not exclusively a program, it becomes a philosophy about
Mm-hmm.
how we deal with internal issues and support our families, and our troopers out on patrol and throughout the ranks. And simultaneously, we had pre-existing boards and community engagement boards, and so certainly some of those needed to move into a remote posture and could. And we purposely engaged in police advisory boards long
Mm-hmm.
before they became legislated. And so they needed to be much like, maybe a board you speak to, a cross section of folks from throughout a particular county. So from Newcastle, Kent to Sussex, so that we, where are our gaps in service? Where are our unmet needs? Where are issues with trust? And how do we embed services, make ourselves more visible in ways that you can control during COVID? And from that, just let that evolve back into something more, face to face when time permits. But I will tell you, we formed some of the greatest relationships from that time that now sit on our police accountability committee, post legislation. But they're folks that we met maybe on a protest line that we were willing to have critical conversations with and let it evolve into a face-to-face conversation. So I think working on those two things simultaneously allowed us to be in the best posture coming out of that period of time. And then I just coupled that with enhancing our social media and celebrating our successes and being accountable for where we fall short. And I think if you look at that period of time, the enhancements we've made in that space have allowed us to be more transparent, more communicative, and more attainable in terms of reach and dialogue with our citizens and communities.
Yeah, these are all excellent points. I'm going to, borrow two things from this, along with many other things that I've found incredibly insightful that you've said. But the necessity to be intentional sort of stuck with me as a very concise and impactful statement. It's simple to remember, and then similarly, but different, when a program becomes a philosophy. It starts out as a thing that you do, and then it becomes the way you do things.
Right.
And what is does that take time? I mean, you can't really put a timer on these things, but it's not an overnight process. And how do you get people to stick with that?
We've and I had the blessing of being a member of our critical incident stress management team when at a time where you had to make it mandatory. So if you're involved in a critical incident, you will do this, this, and this, because sadly, our culture at that time may have been, I'm talking the 90s and early 2000s, may have been to just, I can handle it. I'll go home, never to speak of it again. And I think two things happen, that being a good foundation with our chaplain corps and other things. And I think getting the right people and the right voices in the room, people that had credibility, people that could draw peers in, and then making it not just, here's resources, here's an app. So for our younger generation who don't want to go see their supervisor, here's these resources at your fingertips. But then having a peer-to-peer connection where that being the last phase, I think really helped fold it into culture, where the right voices at the table, people with credibility, with empathy and integrity, we're going to get this from a program to an embedded, culturalized part of our agency. And as much as I've said throughout my tenure in that role, when my job is to not just show you what we do, but to show you who we are. And in order to do that, they have to be okay. They have to be well. And then I think the byproduct of that is what you see in the community. And I often say, you'll meet a trooper, but they're also, maybe the soccer coach, your fellow parishioner, your neighbor. And in that, you don't just learn what we do, you find out who we are.
We are. Yeah. No, I think that's really important. Again, the parallel is, I think there's an obvious parallel. I think where there's divergence is in the level of intensity that we're talking about. And so, if you were to witness a shooting or, something else that was traumatic, really is traumatic, and you're an officer, you sort of required, a referral and provided this support. I look at the challenges and the stress and the enormity of the decision making that boards have to do. I mean, they're public school boards, right? They're making decisions for tens of thousands of children, right? Their lives, what's going to happen, how are in some cases, $250 million going to be spent. These are not insignificant decisions. Now they're not traumatic. In the same sense, but I do feel like there should be some kind of recognition or supports or something that's equally provided, right, to these people who are doing a public service, and they'll do better when they're in a supportive environment that prioritizes their well-being.
I couldn't agree more. And I have many friends in the education field, and certainly those charged with making such critical decisions. I often consider, and I mentioned it earlier, but character and competence. Those are, you have board members that have competence, or they wouldn't own those seats, right? But they are going to continuously invest in learning, bettering their problem solving skills, all of that. But the character piece, to keep that well and whole, does require,
Right.
a commitment to wellness, an investment in mental health. And I think it's a great conversation being had across this country more than ever. And it absolutely applies to every discipline. And, when you can certainly be scrutinized or challenged for such important decisions, I think the investment in the wellness and the character piece is every bit as important as the competency piece.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'll put a plug in for FSE on that point, that our core mission is to provide this training and capacity building for individuals who consider running, and then the currently seated and serving board members, and we are here to be of assistance and of aid, because we do recognize, the importance of the decision making that they're doing. Well, Melissa, it has been my absolute pleasure. I am so grateful that you spent time with us today, from, highlighting topics like from character and competencies, and that this notion of leadership it's a relay race. And if we focused on leaving a legacy, and also I appreciate personally talking about the unique strengths that women bring. I think that's important. And probably the wonderful thing that I thought you said that was really kind of inspirational to me is that the higher you go, the more people you're serving. And I think keeping that front and center is great. So this has been invaluable for me. I am sure that the audience enjoyed it. I want to thank you for being here today, and I hope that you'll come back.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and for all that your boards are doing.
Thank you so much. And to our audience, our listeners, thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.